Hello, today is Wednesday, April 3rd, and welcome to episode 318 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm Jessica Jones, NSI's Deputy Executive Director, and today I'm joined by two NSI Senior Fellows, Les Munson and Morgan Vigna. Because if you watch the show, you know we like to talk about the unknowns and mysteries here at Fault Lines. Today we're talking about Havana syndrome. This week, a recently released joint investigation by Russian, American, and German journalists claimed that the Havana syndrome, which, as you may know, is this what we call this mysterious ailment that has caused American diplomats and officials dizziness, headache, fatigue, nausea, memory loss, and has caused some, American intelligence officers to actually leave active service due to complications from the condition. It's been in the news since about 2016 when the first cases came out. But the U.S. government calls it just anomalous health incidents. Last year, in response to kind of a cry to uncover the causes of Havana syndrome, the U.S. intelligence community came out with a report concluding that it was, quote, very unlikely that people were experiencing symptoms that were caused by an adversarial nation state. But this week, this new report by the three groups of journalists suggests that it, in fact, isn't unknown. It's the Russians' military intelligence agency that is the cause of Havana syndrome. The investigation identifies Unit 29155 of the GRU as causing the symptoms, that senior members of this unit have received awards and political promotions for work related to the development of non-lethal acoustic weapons, that geolocation data shows that operators attached to that unit traveling undercover were present in places where Havana syndromes struck. And then editorial boards like that of the Washington Post are now calling for the U.S. government to re-look into the issue, along with, of course, the folks suffering from these symptoms and their advocates. So, the first question, Morgan and Les, the syndrome and these really terrible stories you hear from folks that are plagued by these symptoms have been around for years now, to the point that the IC had to come out. 5 IC agencies came out last year and said we cannot find the causes. It's not likely attributed to any country. And now we report saying the opposite, actually targeting one country, Moscow in Russia. What do we think about the delta between these two reports? What do we find credible? What do we think is going on? Les, I'll turn first to you.
Well, I think anytime the government is using the word anomalous, you should raise at least one eyebrow, and probably both. So yes, there should be an investigation. There should be a congressional investigation. There should be bipartisan congressional investigation into what the intelligence community has asserted about these attacks, because it does seem like the evidence in the 60 Minutes report is fairly compelling. And even before that report came out, the number of Americans complaining about these symptoms and these episodes were very compelling and should be taken very seriously. The idea that there was some sort of mass hysteria or some sort of socialized complaint, which is what the IC, the top levels of the IC were asserting, does not seem very credible to me. These are highly effective individuals that we posted in very difficult conditions in a bunch of different places from a bunch of different agencies, a bunch of different parts of the government, all saying very similar things. It should have been taken more seriously, or it appears that it should have been taken more seriously. I do kind of wonder if there's some politicization here of intelligence reports and the things that the IC is saying publicly. It makes me wonder about the role of the Director of National Intelligence and the establishment of that office. I don't like this kind of public, what appears to be some sort of public deception, or the possibility of public deception. That does not make that office, which was created by Congress, more effective as a public actor. So Congress really needs to take a look at this. Congress is a stakeholder here, and I would like to see it done in public as much as possible while still protecting, of course, sources and methods and that kind of thing. But when you combine it with the problems we've had keeping information secure and people as low as the corporal level exposing massive secrets, it really kind of makes you wonder what's going on at the top levels of our intelligence community.
Let's bring it back to intel leaks over here. And if you haven't watched the 60 Minutes report, a lot of folks found it really compelling. You have, DOD officials who were involved in the investigation originally into the Havana syndrome speaking out about it and agreeing that it was caused by Russia, right? It was actually quite an interesting interview. Morgan, what do you think? If it is the Russians, are we just afraid to say that? Are we afraid that their response, or, what would be a motivation behind, there's stories about this being a cover up. I'm not going to say that. I put that in air quotes, but, what would be the motivation behind the the IC or the government trying to, not publicly attribute this to an adversary?
I think that, look, there are a lot of conspiracy theories floating about, and I think this really speaks to the fact that this investigation has been, conducted by the intelligence community, and the intelligence community is not necessarily one to share their sources, methods, etc. Bottom line, though, this whole investigation coming out on Sunday could not have been worse timing for the administration, especially with the Pentagon coming out on Monday, confirming a possible new case involving a senior U.S. defense official who attended the NATO summit in Riga last summer. The White House's response, backing the IC investigation on Havana syndrome, does not surprise me. But I'm wondering if the IC wishes it weren't a little bit more forward leaning on this one. I get that the IC doesn't want to point fingers, particularly when it comes to foreign adversaries, just given the risks involved in doing so. But to be so pointed in their denial that a foreign adversary was involved or responsible, it does trigger a lot of speculation, and especially when there is such compelling evidence to prove otherwise or suggest otherwise. If the IC did get this wrong, I think there are a lot of questions here about, how, Burns and Avril Haines will be held accountable. And if indeed Russia is responsible, for causing a lifetime of injuries to U.S. personnel, what is the response from this administration? And more so, looking towards the future, we've got an election in November. If Russia is responsible and former President Trump wins a second term, what is the next administration's response to this? I think, again, this raises a lot more questions that I don't think the American public had been previously thinking about before the investigation was released.
I think it's, interesting when the stories, to your point, that came out Monday night about another official being struck possibly with Havana syndrome. The reports make it very clear. Secretary Austin is feeling fine, basically, right? Like downplaying those fears. The fact that you have to say that,
just to be clear,
right? Secretary of Defense has not been targeted by the Russians, right? Like that's frightening. And so if you need something in the headlines to bring it to the American people, and I think, to everyone's point, the IC seems to waffle a little bit, right? Prior investigations and reports show that people's suffering might be impacted by some sort of weapon. It was very ambiguous. And then they kind of turn about very quickly a year ago, say very clearly that it isn't attributed to anyone. And so there's a lot of room to speculate there when you seem to be reversing course so quickly. And now you've got, of course, this joint investigation that's pointing in a very different direction, and not just to some sort of weapon, but to one particular country that, is waging war in Europe, right? Okay, everyone. So everyone speculate away. Feel fine. Check your health. That's a wrap. Thanks so you guys. If we start feeling bad, you've heard it here first. We've called it out. We've talked about it. That's a wrap. Thanks so much to Devlin Burney, Claude Jennings, and the NSI team for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Friday, April 5th. And wonder, is Jamil Jaffer going to make it? For another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check us out there. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.